Not yet, unfortunately. If Roy's the cruise director, I guess that makes me the captain. So let's set sail. Okay. It's good to see you all. I'm really grateful that you are here, that you've made time in the midst of the busy summer. There are only a few precious weekends left before school starts for those of us with kids, and that sort of locks us in for a while. And so I'm grateful that you've made it here. And we are, just a reminder, we're in week 3 of our band series. And we started this band series a couple of years ago. We first looked at the book of James. Last year we looked at the book of Job, and we're doing this series for 2 important reasons, 2 very specific reasons. The first is, as governments and schools, even religious institutions, often try to silence ideas, especially ideas that they see as a threat to their values or authority, banning books are often a tool that they employ. And the church with a big C, is no exception to that. From the beginning, Christians have really wrestled with voices and which voices belong and which ones don't. Sometimes banning books that they felt were dangerous or unorthodox. But Christianity has never been a monologue. And that's important for me to say as a preacher who spends a lot of time thinking about monologue. It's always held a wide range of interpretations, especially as it relates to Scripture. And there have been debates about these interpretations, about what the gospel means and how God speaks through sacred text. So this idea of an annual band series seeks to engage this dialogue that we are to have with Scripture, not sidestepping those books that we may not understand or make us feel uncomfortable, where we are de facto banning them from our own spiritual edification and growth. The second reason we're also doing this series is because every year our choir takes off for a month in the summer, and it is a well-deserved break. They're fantastic. And it's a natural place then for us to pivot from traditional worship and create a more casual environment. It also allows me not to wear a robe in the heat of the summer, which I appreciate. And it allows us to experiment or to sort of stretch how we worship as a church. And that in and of itself is a blessing. And this year we are blessed to have our modern worship band leading as we have combined both services for this month. It's an opportunity for us to mix our worshiping communities and be reminded that even though we may have different worship preferences, we are one church with one mission. And so I'm very, very grateful that you all have made an effort to be here, let go of your preferences with worship. And no doubt this sort of series is different, and nothing can say that more clearly than First United Methodist Church of Dallas studying the book of Revelation for 4 weeks, right? Next week, we're going to conclude this thing, and I'm sure there's some of you that are like, thank God. There's a little tiny part of me, very small, quiet part of me that wishes we had another 4 weeks wrestling with the book of Revelation, because it's such a wild ride. So if you've been reading the book of Revelation over these past few weeks, you are experiencing this wild ride for yourself. It is also very complex. It has been elevated for all the wrong reasons in popular Christianity, and it is so misunderstood. It's misunderstood and misappropriated and misapplied to not only the church, but then the church's response or role in the world. And I think that it is a perfect book for us to wrestle with this summer, especially for this band series. And I know that high school Mitchell would really appreciate this series. High School Mitchell would be very proud of current day Mitchell. 22 years later, I finally have a response to all my friends in high school that wanted me to stop listening to Tupac and read the Left Behind series. And so I am grateful that I finally articulated a response to those friends I had that were very, very committed to the book of Revelation, speaking about what was going to happen to us as a people. And because we as mainline Protestants often avoid this book, we do so, and that in and of itself is a danger, because we see it maybe as being irrelevant, or maybe we're overwhelmed by what the book has to say. It's certainly mysterious and it is misused. But I do believe that we as a church, especially our church, we need to find ways to reclaim its central message, because the central message has a great deal of importance for us as we seek to live out our faith in 2025. Because the book is not, and we've said this from the very beginning, the book is not a riddle to solve or something that we need to decode or try to figure out. That's not the point of the book of Revelation. It's not a divine plan on how we need to read the tea leaves better. Rather, Revelation is simple. It's a revealing of Jesus, of the truth of what faithfulness looks like when the world is falling apart. This has been our trajectory, and a faithful, honest attempt at taking a book in our scripture that is weaponized and reclaiming it. So just a reminder, in week 1, we talked about Revelation not as a story of escape, but it is about seeing Christ clearly in the midst of our suffering. And then in week 2, we shifted the question, because we do live in the midst of chaos, in the midst of suffering, in the elevation of fear. How do we seek power, or do we seek power, or are we focused on worshiping the crucified Christ? Sort of this binary between, are we seeking power in our own life, or are we going to take on that real posture? We talked about worship being a posture. Are we going to take on a posture of worshiping Christ? So are we seeking power, or do we believe our well-being is dependent on it? Is it necessary for our security? Is it the essential thing for us if we're going to flourish? Or is worshiping the crucified Christ our goal? Can we then, through that worship, resist? Can we center the crucified Christ in our life? So last week, if you remember, we were shown the throne room, that image of sort of the epicenter of power in heaven. And this power, this authority, this justice is not, though, a place of domination. It's a place of worship. Worship around the Lamb. What John first believes is going to be the Lion of Judah turns out to be the slain Lamb, the crucified Christ, who is reigning in this throne room, and power is reframed then through sacrificial love. That's true power in heaven. That's how God understands power. That's how we are invited to participate in what God is doing through sacrificial love. And this week things shift again for us, because John's vision turns and we move from glorifying the crucified Christ in the imagery of worship to a world that is unraveling. And so we pick up the action, a lot of action here in chapter 6. These first 8 verses are some of the most recognizable images of Revelation. So as we read them, I encourage you to reflect on how you've heard them used in the past. So Revelation 6, verses 1 through 8. John says, "Then I saw the Lamb open one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures call out as with the voice of thunder, 'Come!' And I looked, and there was a white horse, Its rider had a bow, a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. And when he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature call out, "Come!" And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth so that people would slaughter one another, and he was given a great sword. And when he opened the third seal, I heard the living creature call out, "Come!" And I looked, and there was a black horse. Its rider held a pair of scales in his hand, and I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a day's pay, and 3 quarts of barley for a day's pay, but do not damage the olive oil and the wine." When he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature call out, "Come." I looked, there was a pale green horse. Its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed with him. And they were given authority over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword, famine, pestilence, and by the wild animals of the earth. This is the sort of crowning image in the book of Revelation for many of us. This is the notion of the 4 horsemen, one of the most misused, misunderstood images in the entire Bible. But I don't want the drama of the text to distract us from what it is saying, from the deeper truth that is present in the text. As we said last week, the images actually are not overly complicated. The metaphors are rather clear. And so the white horse here in Revelation 6 is about conquering and power. The red horse is about war. It's about the absence of peace. The black horse simply represents scarcity and economic injustice, and the pale green horse represents death. This is not fantasy. It's not fantasy. Because these are forces that we still recognize today, right? So the question is this prophecy or is this simply a diagnosis? The tension within Christianity is really right here. The challenge of understanding the book of Revelation lands right here. Are we reading about future events that need to be understood, or is John holding up a mirror for the church to see a reflection of the way that the world is currently? That's where the tension exists when we read the book of Revelation. Are we talking about the future, or are we looking into a mirror to see the present day? Because beyond what the 4 horsemen represent is a fundamental question then about God's power, divine intervention, free will, and human agency. A fundamental divide, a fault line exists in how this book is interpreted, which often plays out in very shocking, very typical ways theologically. Is God the cause of suffering? Is God unleashing this destruction on the earth? Or is John speaking about an unveiling on how the world already operates? That is a fundamental question. And how we choose to answer that question has theological ramifications for us as we think through our role in God's work in the world. Yes, I'm aware that when we read chapter 6, we see that the Lamb, the crucified Christ, opens the seals, but notice what is revealed, not God's wrath or some divine punishment for humanity, but a pulling back of the curtain on what humans have already unleashed on the world. We don't have to move into the future to see these 4 elements play out in our life. We know what colonization and a desire to conquer in unchecked power looks like in the world, don't we? We can just read the New York Times right now and see what is happening in the world. We can see what war and the absence of peace is doing to communities all across the globe. We know what scarcity and economic injustice means for folks in very real time, and we are aware of what death looks like. We know it, we see it, we experience it. So, in that sense, I think it's important for us to realize that the Lamb, the crucified Christ, the opening of the seals is not causing these things to happen, but rather revealing what is already happening in the world. Pulling our attention to the very real divide that exists in our world. Because Revelation doesn't show us a God who manipulates suffering to teach us a lesson. That is not what the book of Revelation is about. It is not a tactic to scare us into accepting Jesus Christ so we can escape this hellhole of a planet. That is not what the book of Revelation is about. Rather, it is about God speaking to God's church and allowing the church to make a decision on how the church is going to position itself in the world. Are we going to participate in the systems that ultimately bring death, or are we going to worship the crucified Christ? Are we going to participate in holding up sacrificial love as the goal? Are we going to worship the Lamb who is slain and walk in the way of mercy and justice and faithful resistance, or are we going to seek power? Are we going to live out of fear? During the pandemic lockdown phase, we all remember it well, we just moved into our house and I decided that I was going to put a wallpaper up in the living room. Turns out it's kind of hard to do. Looked easy on YouTube. Hard to do in practice. But I put up this wallpaper. It had pattern to it, so I had to be real precise. I did pretty good job, I think. But like last summer, I realized the wallpaper was starting to peel. Eli calmly let me know that it had been peeling ever since I put it up, but I just recognized it for the first time. And like once you see something, you can't unsee it. So now I just walk around thinking about, am I going to try to fix this wallpaper and redo it, or are we going to hire a professional this time? And we haven't made a decision yet, but I cannot not see the peeling wallpaper in the living room now. And I think in a lot of ways, that's what the book of Revelation does. It does that to us. It should pull back the curtain, not to show us what's coming someday, not to talk about what's going to happen in the future, but show us what's been there all along. It's similar to the time I spent on the border, like many of you have, because once you see the destruction of our immigration policies, see the families torn apart, witness the way we treat the immigrant in this country, you can't unsee it. You just know now that that's how it operates. This, in a lot of ways, is the power of the book of Revelation. Revelation is unveiling the world as it is and then calling the church to resist how the world is currently operating. John is pulling back the curtain on the systems God's people are trapped in, and this is echoing how Rome operates when John is writing this letter. From being exiled to the island Patmos, this is how John experiences Rome. Rome's hunger for oppression, the normalization of war, a rigid economy where the rich feast and the poor starve, and a slow, haunting spread of death. It's not just a symbol in poetry, it's a protest letter, a pastorally written protest letter to the 7 churches in Asia Minor. It's not about a distant future. It's about how the empire functions in the present. To the original audience, these weren't metaphors. They weren't metaphors. They were lived headlines and experiences. Under the emperor, the Roman Empire was flexing its imperial muscles. Conquering wasn't just about the military, it was an ideology of the empire. Violence was how Rome, we know, kept peace. Economic injustice meant grain for the poor cost a day's wage, while the wealthy stored up all the oil and the wine. Did you pick that up? Don't take away the olive oil and the wine, because only the wealthy can afford that, so keep that over there. But we'll sort of start taxing or taking the wheat and the grain. Sounds familiar. Death was constant for the conquered, the enslaved, the dissenters. John, once again, isn't forecasting. He's saying to the church, do not then align with the powers that be. Do not do it. Do not do it. Do not sell out and align yourselves with the powers that be. Do not turn the gospel into an extension of the Roman Empire. That's the fundamental point of the book of Revelation. Thus, it becomes a warning for us as a church today. So where do we go from here? Well, the best place to go is then right into what resistance looks like for the church. In chapter 7, we read, after this, John says, I looked, and there was a great multitude that no one could count from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, robed in white. And they cried out in a loud voice, saying, salvation belongs to our God, who is seated on the throne, and to the Lamb. Think about what this statement really is about. If John is urging the church not to align itself with the Roman Empire, this is a clear act of resistance, because there are people we see in this chapter from all over the world who have gathered together to worship God. No longer were you bound to your identity, your social location, where your citizenship was. Everyone who found Christ was participating together in worship. This is a contrast. The horsemen then sow fear, but the multitude, these rebels, the multitude lifts praise. Where the empire divides, Christ gathers across boundary. John is painting a radically different vision of power, not riding in to conquer, but standing as a crucified Christ, drawing people from every nation into a sense of belonging. It's a powerful image here in chapter 7. Diverse groups of people finding shelter from the storm in their co-participation. They're coming together, their sense of belonging, and worshiping the crucified Christ, not the emperor. John is painting a radically different vision of power. It's a powerful image, no doubt. And its juxtaposition is critical as we read then into chapter 8. Because while the empire seeks power, Christ is seeking unity through worship. And so we read the very first verse in 8. When the Lamb opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. Now, I'm not sure we could handle half an hour of silence right here in the sanctuary as an act of worship. You want to try? Just kidding. Silence. Silence. This is sort of the immediate response that takes place in heaven. Silence, not immediate violence, not a proclamation of victory, not vengeance, just silence. And I think it's hard for us in today's environment to believe that silence is actually an act of resistance. Y'all feel obligated to say something all the time about something happening in the world? Maybe it comes with my profession, but it does feel like we are constantly being asked to say something, to comment about something, to have a stance on something. Silence is really not a tool that is employed much, and it certainly is not expected in the face of injustice to find silence. And sometimes resistance doesn't start with shouting. Sometimes silence is faithful. I do believe that silence can be resistant. Sometimes silence is simply a refusal to cheer for death. Sometimes it's an unwillingness to participate in the noise. Sometimes it's standing still when the world is spinning. And I don't want us to miss this here in chapter 8. And I thought about stopping here because I think it's so important that we talk more about silence, especially as an act of resistance. But we're going to spend a lot of time talking about silence in the fall and rest and Sabbath, and I'll just save it for then. But I do believe silence is a faithful response to the chaos of the world, but we can't stop here because the text doesn't stop here, and it would be inauthentic for me to pretend that it does, because what comes next is actually very unsettling. An angel steps forward, incense is offered, the prayers of the saints are offered, and then from an altar of heaven, after the silence, fire is hurled to the earth, thunder and lightning, an earthquake. It sounds like judgment. It sounds like wrath. A surface level reading of Revelation in this chapter allows us to attribute vengeance to God. But remember, this is a book about symbols, a book of unveiling. What's happening here, this sort of response of violence and fire and earthquakes and thunder, what's happening here isn't God losing control, it's the world as it is being brought fully into view. And here's the key: the catalyst for this shaking, for this response from heaven, isn't vengeance, it's prayer. Maybe righteous anger, but righteous anger comes from a deep understanding, a deep seeing of the injustice. The prayers of the saints, our cries for justice, for deliverance, for mercy, they go up like incense, and those prayers disturb the status quo. They unsettle the empire, they move heaven and shake the earth. So maybe silence isn't passive, maybe it's simply the breath needed, the pause before the upheaval, the necessary pause before prayer and action. We do not separate those two things here at First Church. Maybe it's a holy pause before God acts decisively, not to destroy the world, but to redeem it. But without the silence, without the pause, we are prone to act out of our own selfishness, a selfishness that is rooted in fear. Thus, we are then drawn to power when we act irrationally, fearfully responding to violence, to the injustice. By enacting the same on our neighbors and enemies, we are drawn to constantly living our life seeking an eye for an eye. So we need to pause. We need to pause. But here's the truth. God isn't asking us to control the chaos. Hear me say that. Your job is not to control the chaos. God is inviting us to remain faithful in the midst of the chaos. The book of Revelation isn't about finding a secret code. It's about becoming the kind of church that refuses to mirror the world's violence and fear and division. That's our work as a church. And so we are left with the tension. Do we live out of our fear, or do we find the sacrificial love of Christ as a defining way to resist the empire? Kind of heavy. But as we move into this time of reflection, I want us to really feel that tension. Do we respond to today's world out of fear, or do we resist through silence and prayer and sacrificial love? Do we respond with fear, or do we respond with sacrificial love? We're going to end today actually with a hymn. It's not in your hymnal. It's a hymn that I've come to love. It's a Catholic hymn, Canticle of the Turning. It's often sung during the Advent season. It reflects Mary's song in Luke, a deep yearning for the world to be as it should be, as God desperately desires it to be.